Good morning or afternoon, depending on what time of day you are looking at this. I'm Jeff Applebaum, and in a minute I'll introduce myself more fully with the rest of my team here. But welcome to this community engagement exercise. This involves site selection for the proposed new correction center, Cuyahoga County Correction Center, to replace its current jail facility that is located at the Justice Center in Cleveland, Ohio. In a minute, we'll get into our agenda. Briefly stated, though, the purpose of this session that you're looking at is to give you background so that you can provide us with survey information and other information regarding your thoughts about the process that we are currently engaged in and the criteria and issues involving with selecting a site for a proposed new correction center to replace the Cuyahoga County Jail. By way of agenda, in a minute, we will introduce ourselves to you. The purpose of this presentation and the survey that we're going to ask you to fill out is very critical in our process. We are first of all going to describe briefly to you what the Correction Center project is all about. We'll show you the program and how we got there and a little history. But we need to obtain your input regarding the criteria to be used to select a site for the new Correction Center. We'll take you through some history and background in a little bit of detail. We will actually show you what the corrections program will be. And by that, we're going to tell you what is to be housed in the new correction center based on over 2 years of study and a tremendous amount of interaction with folks in the county and with the steering committee. We're also going to give you a bit of a preview as to what a new correction center might look like, so you can envision what it might be on some of the potential sites that will be under consideration. We'll then tell you about the site selection process itself. We will present the initial proposed criteria that we want you to comment on and help us with. And then we'll show you the method by which you can comment and provide evaluation of the proposed criteria, along with any other questions, comments, or concerns that you would want to express as part of this process. Now, this entire process is being done on behalf of a steering committee. We'll tell you about an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, among these folks, but essentially all the critical decisions on this project are made by a consensus of these 12 individuals representing members of the elected officials and members of the county, of the city, of the courts, the prosecutor, the public defender, the sheriff, and some other individuals. So you can see on the left here who the members of the steering committee are. Let me take a minute to introduce the three of us. So my name's Jeff Applebaum. I'm with Project Management Consultants. I'm the managing director of that firm, which provides project management services. I also am a partner in the law firm, Thompson Hine, head of our construction law group. But I do many projects in this role throughout the country, including the same role on our county hotel project and our convention center project. Andy, if you could take a second to introduce yourself.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending when you view this. My name is Andrew Couples. I'm a senior principal with DLR Group, Westlake Reed Latkowski of Cleveland. And I've had the opportunity for the past 2 years to work with Jeff Applebaum and the steering committee in leading our program planning team. And what I think has been most important as you'll hear today is not just looking at what the jail should be, but looking at what the right number for a population or capacity should be, what we should do in terms of diversion, how we bring in best practices, and how we really focus on treatment programming in a secure environment. And Curtis Pulitzer has been really part of helping to develop what that program is. Curtis?
Yes, hi, I'm Curtis Pulitzer, principal with Pulitzer Bogart and Associates. We're a national justice planning firm working with Andy Couples and with Jeff Applebaum for the past year and a half or more on the planning of the jail component. And you'll hear more about what we were planning. Andy just gave you a bit of an insight to create a new correctional center that will meet the needs of Cuyahoga County.
And one comment I'll make before we get into this, when I was hired to do this a few years ago, I thought I was managing a building project. It has become very apparent to me that this is all about the system, the process. It's not just about what we do to replace the aging and obsolete jail. It's how to provide better treatment options, diversion options to keep people out of the jail, and to make a better environment for those who are there, including the staff that works there. So that's what this is all about. But with that in mind, let me take a minute and tell you a little bit about the project history and background. Those watching this are, I'm sure, familiar with the Justice Center. It was built in 1976. At that time, it included Jail 1, which was 956 beds. As the jail population grew and continued to grow, it became obvious that a second jail had to be built to supplement the first jail. That was Jail 2 that you see on the right, completed in 1995 with 480 beds. Unfortunately, by 2013, it became apparent that there were large problems with the Justice Center altogether, which includes the courts, the police administration building, and with the jails. Because of issues of deferred maintenance that probably wasn't taken care of, and other issues, it was determined that a huge amount of work was required. The building leaked. There were all sorts of issues. In fact, a detailed assessment was done in 2013 that demonstrated that just to fix that which was broken would cost more than 50% of the asset value of the complex itself. And this is without changing anything, without making anything truly up to date, changing things programmatically. This was just fixing what was broken. Specifically, the Jail 1 itself would have cost 47% of the initial construction value to take care of. But the problem also was that these facilities programmatically didn't work. They didn't have the necessary features that you would have in a modern facility. They were very expensive to operate. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. In any event, because of that study, a follow-up study was done in 2014. Renovation options were looked at. But once again, it was demonstrated that the cost of renovating would probably be in the $300 to $428 million range. And that was back in 2014. And that was without making any significant changes to really upgrade these facilities programmatically. At that time, the cost of a new build was unknown. These were just renovation options. Another thing I should point out is when these studies were done, plotting was done to show what was occurring in jail population, which continued to increase and increase and increase, despite the fact, by the way, that the population of the Cuyahoga County was actually going down. Arrests were actually going down. So it was very strange that the jail population was going up. But interestingly, the studies that came out in 2014 actually assumed that these facilities would have to be built for a population upwards of 2,600 by 2030, which is an astonishing population, considering the fact that, as you can see here, these facilities were originally built to house less than 1,500 people. In 2014 and 2018, in response to this, a series of visioning workshops took place, and frankly, officials were grappling with how to take care of this problem and under what mechanism. Because of these when these visioning sessions took place, some guiding principles about how to have a process were worked through. And you can see these common sense principles about making sure that we had good process, good cost control, that these were designed for great operations, et cetera, et cetera. But notice in guiding principle number 1, it was critical that these facilities did involve a public engagement process, because you cannot have a facility like this without having good public support and understanding of what's going on. So that is one of the reasons, obviously, that we're doing this engagement process today. But what ultimately happened is there were real issues as to how decisions would be made. This led to a memorandum of understanding in 2019 among those 12 individuals that I showed you on the earlier slide. And the memorandum of understanding had a few different elements, which I'm going to tell you about. But before we get there, Andy, I'd like you just to take a second to talk about one of the observations about jail 1 in particular, and what some of the issues were with, aside from having to upgrade the facility, just in terms of fixing what was broken. I'd like you to talk just a little bit about the operational constraint of this facility.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff's already talked to you a bit about the fact that just the physical cost to upgrade these buildings would be equal to about 50% of their current value. But on top of that, there's a lot of operational issues. First, Jail 1 is based upon housing units that house about 24 offenders. Jeff, if you want to hit the next slide. In reality, today, we do housing units which are in the neighborhood of 48 to 60 offenders. Why is that important? What that means is that Jail 1, just for housing, requires twice as much staff as a modern replacement jail would be. And that's not just the difference between one person and 2 people. That's the difference between 5 people and 10 people per each housing unit. So it's a huge operational cost to the county. Secondly, throughout this jail, you can just hit the next 2, Jeff, as I talk. Every service is delivered somewhere else. Inmates have to be escorted to recreation. Offenders are escorted to visiting or to court movement. Offenders are escorted to medical. Today in the jail, if we look at the next slide, Jeff, what we really focus on, what does that mean? Excessive movement is increasing staffing and operational costs, and perhaps even more importantly, decreasing safety and security for offenders and staff alike, as well as we've heard from virtually every stakeholder and volunteer group that works in the jail, limiting offenders' access to programs and treatment, which is a very, very important aspect of operation. Jeff?
Right, and just to make clear what Andy taught me and Curtis taught me about this is in the current jail, so you take one of these cell units. What does it mean? You have one individual who's there for direct supervision, and anytime anyone has to move for any one of these functions, there's another individual that takes them. This is opposed to a unit that would be twice the size, which it can be with still the direct supervision, therefore half the individuals. And then Andy's going to show you the next feature of this.
And typically, what would a jail of the future, or a jail of today, quite frankly, be? A jail of today focuses on service delivery at the housing unit, commissary and medical kiosks, decentralized programming. In fact, each housing unit has a recreation area, a sun deck, if you will, as an extension of the day room, so people can actually be outside and get fresh air. Medical triage, dining at the housing unit, visiting and video visiting at the housing unit. Those are the kinds of things we are really looking at the future for several reasons. One, to help drive the operational costs lower for the county and the taxpayer, but perhaps more importantly, to provide a better environment for both the offender and the staff for rehabilitation, program delivery, and to reduce the sense of tension that naturally occurs in a lot of our older facilities in the country. It really should be a major improvement, not only for the offenders and their families that visit, but perhaps more importantly for the staff that we talk about serving a life sentence 8 hours a day as a life sentence. Jeff?
So with some recognition that we knew that these facilities were outdated, obsolete, and programmatically didn't work and were very expensive to run for the reasons that you've seen, what happened was this steering committee was formed, and the function of the steering committee is to attend meetings, to watch the process of developing ideas, and to make a series of determinations. And these are some of them that are in the memorandum of understanding. And by the way, the first determination after I was on board as the project manager was to select the programmers. And those are the groups run by Andy and Curtis. And then to develop a program to go through really what has been 2 years of detailed study as to how this could be done, and to make a series of decisions step by step. We have to be very convincing for this steering committee. They have to be convinced that we are giving them the right solutions, because for every decision made, the steering committee must, 10 of 12 members of that committee must vote yes. If only 3 people disagree with the decision, we can't go forward. That is to assure and guarantee that everyone is on the same page. Now notice that in the green represent determinations that have already been made. In red, one of the determinations is to determine the site, either for a new courthouse or a new jail. Right now, we're talking about the new jail. And so the step is, what is the criteria? What criteria should be used to select the site? A little bit more about process. The overall process looks like this. After we started up our engagement, we had to go through, as I talked about, almost a 2-year process called programming and project definition, where we really interviewed everybody involved and determined what kind of space is required, what needs to be next to what in this space, what are the operations, what are the options that we would have. And we get through the process of developing this entire program to serve the needs of the county. And then we continue on with the next step, which is to get to a criteria design. And part of it is selecting the site. So that's where we are right now as part of the process. There's a lot more going on, but that's what this today's survey is going to focus on. So after carefully considering a substantial amount of information, and you can go back and look at the many steering committee meetings and what information was presented, all of the meetings, their agendas, the presentations and the meetings themselves are on the county's website. You can look at any of this stuff. It's all public record. But by September 17th of 2019, there was a series of determinations that were made by the committee and voted on by at least a 10 to 12 vote. And this is a very important one that relates to the jail. And I'll read it. The steering committee determines that there are significant opportunities to reduce population of the jail through a systemic approach to jail population management and reforms consistent with our commitment to public safety. Now, remember that the 2014 study said we had to have a jail that could accommodate up to 2,600 beds. The study that was done over 2 years indicated that that is far too many people to be in jail, that there were opportunities for people not to be in jail, either through bail reform, through diversion, because we had seriously mental ill that were there that shouldn't be there, through a lot of other functions to get people out of that jail. By reducing jail size, it's a more humane thing to do. We could get people out of the jail that didn't belong there, but also we could cut down the operation costs because it's very expensive to needlessly house people in a jail, both to construct it and also to pay for the operations. So this determination went on. We therefore determined that planning should proceed based on an assumption of a rated capacity for the jail of no more than 1,600 beds, with support core planned for no more than 2,400 beds. In other words, if we could get to a horizontal jail that we could build by components, we could build a core that you'll see that is expandable, but we did not want to start with housing units greater than 1,600 beds, which Andy will tell you in a few minutes, implies a day-to-day population of no more than 1,350 individuals. Now that means greatly reducing the jail population, because even today, it is far greater than that. It's not up to that 2,600, but it can get as high as 2,000. It goes on. We recognize that these are bold initiatives, but believe that this reflects current national trends and with the concerted effort of all parts of our justice system is achievable. However, should circumstances change, we further determine that the planning for the jail should allow for an incremental adjustment upward or downward within the range to a maximum capacity up to the 2,400 beds based on projections through the year 2045. So Andy, why don't you take a second and just to talk a little bit about this determination based on historic utilization and previous projections.
And it's not just about the determination, it's about the will of the steering committee in the county to implement change. Effectively, Jeff, if you just hit the next slide, please. Effectively, we're talking about an ADP, the average number of bodies of about 1,350. which is a significant reduction from a historic utilization and previous projections. And I think the good thing for both Curtis and I, as folks that are involved in jail planning, who face this issue every day about how big the jail should be, and especially today with the emphasis on social justice and how we treat people, the stakeholders who are sitting at that table as equal members of the Justice Center and the county and the city are taking tremendous actions to make this a reality. Curtis assisted them in putting together a program for community-based mental health and substance abuse diversion, not inside the jail, not inside a secure facility, but the opportunity for law enforcement, for others to divert people away from the jail when they need other kinds of treatment alternatives. And in fact, the benefit to that to the county is if it's done with private providers, they have access to Medicare, to Obamacare, to private insurance, and it's not solely a county responsibility.
With much better outcomes, Andy.
Much better outcomes.
And Curtis and Andy, you may want to mention, based on the original studies, what percentage of individuals in that jail were actually there, not because of criminal activity, but really because of serious mental illness. The primary issue was serious mental illness that got them there, not the criminal activity. Would you comment on that?
Yeah, on a daily basis, there are probably 100 or plus more individuals in the facility that there with serious mental illness, or those who are also mental illness with addiction problems that really could be diverted out of the jail.
And quite frankly, national research has shown that those folks, when they're picked up for something, end up in jail because that's the easiest place to take them. That's why for the county, and you see the headline at the bottom of the slide, committing money for 2 years to fund this kind of a program is a major step forward in reducing the jail population and providing more humane treatment. Also, the county's moving forward with funding central booking on an interim basis. What does that mean? It means better coordination among stakeholders so that appropriate decisions can be made on pretrial and release sanctions. All of this is consistent with public safety, with the law, with community norms. But I think that finally then what we're left with, the 1,350 beds we're planning for, those are also planned for treatment in a secure environment. There is a portion of the population that will continue to present a public risk. There is a portion of the population that presents a risk of flight if they're being held on a pretrial basis. There is a portion of the population that's getting a short-term local sentence to the county jail. But this facility is not planned just to be a warehouse. This facility is planned with treatment and best practices at its core. And I really, I think it's been enlightening for Curtis and I to work with the steering committee that look at the numbers and say, you're right, we don't need to build that much. And then take the actions to make that reality. Jeff?
So speaking of those actions, what then occurred after this is we continued to say, okay, we now know what the size should be, but where should it be located? A series of additional studies were done, and the topic of many, many meetings. And once again, you can go and look at these meetings yourself. But basically, what was determined as a result of those meetings was that you simply could not expand or renovate Jail 1 or Jail 2 in order to accomplish what we needed to accomplish in a new correction center. It was also determined that you really couldn't build this downtown because the amount of acreage required to do this the right way, to have the kind of program you're going to see in a few minutes. So on November 12th, 2020, there were 3 more determinations critical to this effort that were made. The first one, determination 1 that you see on the screen, the steering committee determines that it is impractical to renovate or expand existing Jail 1 or Jail 2, and that future jail planning should be limited to consideration of a new jail on a site outside of downtown Cleveland core, with an initial rated capacity to be determined, but once again, not to exceed 1,600 beds with flexibility to get up to 2,400 beds. And once again, the reason for this is that the renovation of the existing facility didn't make sense. And really, you don't want to do a high-rise jail on a small site downtown for a variety of reasons. The ideal thing to do was to put it more on a campus site with more acreage, and that's only practical outside of the downtown core. And you'll see more about that in a few minutes. Another determination that the committee made on November 12th, which you see there as determination number 3, is that it determines that the proposed siting criteria, and we're going to share that with you, for the new jail is appropriate. Now, that's the initial determination, and that the county should proceed to identify and provide comparative evaluation of potential sites. However, along with that, while the committee said the initial criteria was appropriate, it was also agreed that we should take that criteria and subject it to a public engagement to make sure that either you agree as the public, or if you don't, to suggest what we may add. But I will also tell you that the committee did not go so far as to indicate of the potential criteria, which criteria are more important than others. And we're going to ask your input on that in a few minutes when we present the criteria to you. Another determination that the committee made, determination number 4, was that the county should proceed with planning for the new standalone jail, including a series of activities, which is actually initiating the site exploration, and this engagement is the first step of that, and doing other things, including getting the criteria architect on board. We are at the programming stage. The next stage is actually to design the specific facility, and obviously thinking about the financing plan and structure of agreements that would be required for the new jail. So that's where we are in the process. So at this point in time, I want to go back and talk about the program itself. So we went through this process for 2 years, talked to all the stakeholders, talked to everybody who uses the jail, and we're now going to tell you about the program and what it is we actually want to locate on this site. So I'm going to turn it over to Curtis to start talking to us about the overview of the jail program itself. Curtis.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, you just heard a lot from Jeff and Andy and how we try to right-size the jail to make the new facility more than a jail, a real treatment facility, and to focus on some very important aspects. So who's in the jail? Who do we have there? Well, we have a called general population. These are people who are classified as minimums, mediums, and maximums. These are primarily pretrial people. They're innocent until proven guilty. We have very few sentenced people in the facility, but we have a very strong focus on developing skilled nursing, special housing for medical detoxification, people coming into the jail with serious addiction problems, and most importantly, a whole range of special housing for the mentally ill who must be in jail. Again, as Andy said earlier, we're going to divert as many as we can to the community, but those that have to be in the facility will be in specialized housing with specialized staff and specialized treatment. These are things that are sorely missing in the current jail facilities. And remember, these are individuals who are from the community. They're our local population. As Andy said earlier, we're going to have a new interim booking facility, but the new facility is going to be a much larger central intake center, again, with a very strong focus on diverting people. Even if they can't get to the diversion center, when they come to the facility, the first thing at the front door, can we still divert that individual out of the jail? Another component is to expedite processing. We're going to have a collaborative effort with members of the justice community, the public defender, the prosecutor, the judiciary, pretrial services, municipal and county, common police court. They're all going to be there at the front door trying to get someone out of the facility before they have to be incarcerated. This is how we're going to keep the jail population down. As we said earlier, we have a full direct supervision operational model. What that means is this is a best practice model, how to manage jails. The correctional officer is the frontline person dealing day to day with the inmates in a housing area. But most importantly, all the services are going to be at the housing unit. We no longer will have to escort individuals, visiting, programming services, all the medical care, the dining, and most importantly, the outdoor exercise, all is there. So everything can happen on the unit, under the direction of the officer working in the unit. We're going to organize the housing in clusters, and you'll see what that means in a minute. And again, I think some of the other key components are developing a facility that meets environmental and biophilic design. So it would be a well facility. This is critically important in terms of bringing natural light, views to the outside, color, material, acoustics, lighting. It's important for the staff that work there and for the inmates in keeping the level of tension in the facility to a minimum. We've seen best practices. This works around the country, and Andy and I have been very familiar with that. That's part of the planning of the new facility, as well as staff wellness. And Jeff, next slide.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Yeah, while
There
we're
we
waiting
go.
for the next slide, just a comment emphasizing something Curtis said. That one officer that's responsible for a housing unit of, on average, 48 beds will be responsible for everything: recreation, food service when it's delivered to the housing unit, access to video visiting. So effectively, it is a highly efficient approach to how we manage and operate a jail. Curtis?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So as we said earlier, we're planning the facility to be able to be up to 1,600, but we're looking for an average daily population of 1,350. If you see the table on the right, that's just a breakdown of all the variety of housing types we have in this facility. There are a lot. A jail is a very complicated building. We have to manage all these different classifications, the treatment needs, and then you have to double it because we have males and we have females. So we have 940 beds for conventional housing, 428 beds out of the 1,350 for males is dedicated to medical and mental health. And then we have the same thing for the females. Again, we have 140 conventional beds and another 140 for medical and mental health. So again, the focus very much on treatment and taking care of our population in a way we cannot do today. Next. So this shows you how we organize the housing. So again, on the right is a table which shows various clusters, 7 clusters of housing. And the clusters will be organized by their need in terms of whether they're initial a reception for inmates coming into the jail the first time, our mental health clusters, our medical clusters, our female clusters, and then organizing each of those by female and male. On the left, you see how some of that organization works. So in effect, we're creating sort of a number of mini jails within the bigger jail. Each cluster of housing units is under the direction of a supervisor with all the services decentralized to that particular cluster. Andy, do you want to add anything?
Just to comment that what that really does is effectuate a very, very good span of control for day-to-day management of not just the offender population, but the staff as well.
Exactly, exactly. So how big is our jail? So a jail, as I said, is a complicated facility. If you see on the table on the right, we have like 17 different components that make up the jail. By far the largest is the housing, but there are a lot of things going on in that facility. It's like a mini city unto itself. And it's a large facility. We're going to be building about 780,000 square feet. We have a lot of outdoor space, as you can see, by 270,000 square feet. A lot of that, a good portion of that is for the outdoor exercise areas and the pictures you saw earlier. But the core services, what I mean by core services, for example, the kitchen area, the booking area, central intake area, laundry, warehouse, some of those functions will be planned to accommodate more inmates. We're hoping we never, ever have to get there, but we have to build an expansion capability and flexibility, especially for special populations. We hope we never get there, but we'll be short-sighted if we didn't do that, and that's been part of the problem at the current jail facilities. Next slide.
So with that, we were asked by the steering committee to help provide some parameters for what kind of site they should be looking at to evaluate. And we looked at a range of alternatives. First being, what if it was a single level facility? Single level facility obviously is going to take a larger site, about 50 to 60 acres, single level housing, outdoor recreation areas open to the sky, potential for incremental expansion. You see the dotted lines on the diagrams. But some of the things that I think are important to the community as they consider the jail as a neighbor is, first of all of our site allocations provide a minimum of 100 feet plus as a buffer from the property line to any fence, and more like 300 feet to any building. All activities occur within the building. We'll talk in a bit about the difference between a prison and a jail. We do not have a lot of quote unquote outdoor activity or yard activity for the population. Fencing will be, any fencing that's provided is not institutional fencing with 16 rows of razor ribbon. It'll primarily be decorative fencing, more to define the property line and to keep the public away from the building than it's intended to keep anybody inside. So again, this for one level, it's a significantly large site. probably not available in close proximity to the city of Cleveland or the ultimate solution for the courts. So we also were asked to take a look at a more compact scheme. And again, avoiding a high rise, this basically would stack housing 2 over 2. That's basically a 2-level jail for housing. Reduces the size to about 25 to 30 acres. Even at this scale, this is not a massive building. The maximum height would be about 40 foot from from grade to the roof, which is about the equivalent of a 3-story office building. So it's not a behemoth sitting out in a neighborhood. Again, we maintain buffers. All activities occur within the building, and any fencing we use would be decorative. And I think it's important to understand the scale and scope of what's being projected in terms of the building. So we'll take a look at some of the ideas of what an urban jail could be. Jeff?
Before you do that, I think you want to go through this explanation.
Yeah, I think we should go through this because I think every place Curtis and I have worked, there's always this perception of what the jail is versus a prison. So let's start with the first is, who do they house? A prison houses sentenced felony offenders from across the state for long sentences. This jail is going to house primarily pretrial offenders and offenders sentenced for minor offenses from Cuyahoga communities. This is a community resource. A prison is typically a campus plan with significant outdoor movement between housing and programs and services and yard time. A jail is contained in a single building. There will really be no movement or activities by the population whatsoever outside the building. A prison is characterized by double fences with razor ribbons and towers. Jail can be configured, as you'll see in moments pictures, to be a quiet neighbor appearing to be an office building. As I said, decorative fencing only to keep public away from the building. Prison is typically a light polluter. It has high levels of light, high mass lighting for security, both in the yard, lighting on the fence. The jail, typically, lighting will be limited to what you would do in a normal building. Site and parking lighting, there'll be no bright pollution of the night sky or the neighborhood. And then I think finally, again, this whole notion of movement, prison, almost all the movement, to programs, to dining, to activities, to work, is on the grounds. And recreation is in large yards because it's a longer term population. The jail has limited movement. Programs and services are delivered at housing. In fact, every housing unit will have its own secure outdoor area for recreation. So it really is.
If I may add, Andy, and again, if it's not your fault if you don't know the difference, the media, TV, the newspapers get it wrong all the time. So hopefully this explanation helps.
Yeah. And again, I think you've heard us talk about, the housing is really our basic building block. This is where activities occur. You see in the pictures at the right, each housing has a recreation area, but you can see the recreation area still has light, has sunlight, natural air, but yet it's shielded from view from the public, as well as it's shielded for inmate view to the surrounding area. But yet it brings ample natural light also into the day room. So the goal is to really create a high quality of environment for not just the offenders, but for the staff that work there every day. So some examples. This is a proposal for the new 2,000-bed detention center for Washington, D.C. in a developing neighborhood. That right across the street, they're looking at turning it into a major housing and commercial development. Planned to look like an office building, that it belongs in the development area. Jeff? Baltimore County, Maryland, detention center in a historic neighborhood. Again, a building which has more of an appearance of office building, not the 5-inch slit windows, not the razor ribbon, not the high mass lighting, the things people have a tendency to typically associate with a jail or a prison building. Douglas County Detention Center in Douglasville, Georgia, 1,600 beds. Looks like a normal office building on the campus. The new Denver Justice Center, which is a companion to the courthouse. This picture is actually taken from the courthouse plaza, but yet this is a 1,200-bed jail in the middle of downtown, the historic district. The San Mateo Maple Street Center, which is both a treatment center, reentry center, and a jail, serving San Mateo County in California. a larger jail, which was on a larger suburban site outside of Phoenix, Arizona. Obviously, the landscape in Phoenix is quite a bit different than it is in Cleveland from the desert. And then finally, this is a proposal for the new Santa Clara South Treatment and Reentry Center. We put this in just to point to the right, where you can see how you work with recreation areas to protect views both from inside to the outside and from the outside to the inside, but yet to allow a lot of vibrant space for the offender population, rather than what is typically happens in the current jail is 1 hour of recreation a day. It really is about providing more activities and assisting in day-to-day management of the population. So we just wanted to have a sense of the fact that what we're discussing, and you think about citing criteria, is a building that hopefully is going to be a good neighbor to your community. Jeff?
Thank you. So let me talk a little bit about the site selection process itself and where we are in that process. These are the steps. Once we make the determination, which we have, as to what the program should be, and the fact that it will be out of the downtown core and it will be a new building, we initially develop some site selection criteria and a scoring methodology that will conform to the program you've seen. So we take a first shot at putting that out. The next step is to obtain the public's input and either to confirm that criteria or to adjust it based on what we hear from the public. And I want to point out, there is no predetermined preferred location. It could be anywhere in the county until we apply factors. The steering committee is looking for the best balance between all of the considerations and concerns. After we get that input, we will take the criteria and once again refine it. But then the next step is for a consultant who specializes in real estate to identify possible sites. Once again, this has to be somewhat confidential. Obviously, if you're looking at a site and people learn about it publicly, you could have a lot of shenanigans going on, and you don't want that. You don't want people to speculate in property or try to cut deals that would only increase taxpayer cost. But there's an effort to initially look at all possible sites. In this particular case, one criteria that you saw was that you need at least 25 to 30 acres. If you do it a certain way, it would be 50 acres. So you know that we're not looking at 5, 10, 15 acre sites. But we identify all possible sites and start then to apply the initial scoring to try to, in essence, shortlist to a smaller group. At this point in time, our design professional, our criteria architect will be on board. The RFQ to select them is going out very shortly. And as we continue to refine the concept design, the specific design, we basically test fit. How does that design work on the shortlisted few sites that we're now thinking about? And there's other refined analysis that we have to perform, cost analysis, constructability analysis, look at the environmental issues and other issues. Ultimately, when we get through all of that, there's going to be a recommendation and approval of a preferred site. Once that occurs, we commence the site acquisition process. There's various ways that can be done, whether it's through the purchase of options, an outright purchase, etc. But once we know that site, and we obviously can't get the community involved on a specific site before it's secured, for the reasons I mentioned before. But once we do know that specific site, we go back to the community engagement process. Now we meet with the community to look at designs, and you look at the various types of designs that Andy showed you, and we find out, what does the community accept? What does the community think is important in design? How do we minimize any negative impact in the community and explore positive design and operational activities for that site? So that's a little bit about the process. Now, at this point in time, what is the proposed site selection criteria to date that we want you to comment on? So what you will see here, and this will be posted on the website, on the right-hand side, you see some detail, and it shows you what the criteria is. For example, the first criteria is access to public transit. You then see what we call red light, yellow light, green light. Green light would represent, this is this scores very well. So green light would mean that this would be very good, that there's, for example, public transit currently available within 2 blocks. It's there 7 days a week. You don't have to do a lot to get public access. Yellow light would be, well, it's neutral. It's not as good as green, but there is access available in the vicinity. Now, of course, we may always go to RTA and say we want you to commit to getting to the site. Red light is, it's really not very good on this criteria. It's not readily available, and there's no commitment. Can't get a commitment to get out to that site. That would be basically red light means stop, probably can't go there. For each of these criteria, you see a green light, a yellow light, and a red light. And what we want you to do when you have a chance is we want you to look at the criteria, and we want you to tell us in your mind what is most important. So from a common sense point of view, access to public transit, what does that mean? How easy will it be to get there by RTA? Public access attorneys and visitors, how easy and affordable will it be to park there? That's parking access, I should say. Highway access is the next one. How easy will it be to drive there? Access to the courts. How far will it be from the courts? For those who are concerned about getting from the court to the jail or back, or think that it is important to have that proximity. Emergency services, if something occurs, how long is it going to take to get an ambulance there or a fire truck there? The next group of criteria, cost. How much will it actually cost the taxpayer to acquire that site and or to build on that site? Ease of acquisition. How easy it will it be to acquire the site without negatively impacting homeowners? Obviously, if you have a site with nothing on it right now, or that's controlled by the county or city, that's one thing. If you have a residential site that has a lot of houses on it, that's quite another thing. Community context buffers. Does the site allow for good sight and sound separation? Can you get the buffers there easily that Andy talked about so that adjacent landowners aren't impacted by sights or sounds of the jail? Now, there's another set of criteria on this next page, some of which we really are not looking for public input because these really just get into constructability. How accessible are utilities? What about soil, drainage, hazardous materials, environmental and historical concerns? Those are matters that are really, it's not a matter of opinion. Either the site is good and these things are taken care of, or it's not, which leads cost and expense. But the next one on this page, impediment to development, is important from a public engagement point of view. Does the surrounding community oppose having a corrections facility as its neighbor? How important is it to you as a selection criteria? How important is that element to you? And then finally, developmental impact. Is the proposed facility compatible with the surrounding community? Is it a positive in a community? Is it a negative in a community? Is it a neutral in a community? So what we have done is we have a series of questions, and in a minute, I'm going to show you how to get there. But what we want you to do is study these criteria. We want you to tell us, and there'll be questions that you can answer. Is there any criteria from this list that is missing? Is there something that is important that we haven't talked about that you think we should be talking about? We're going to have you rank these criteria on a 1 to 5 scale. What's most important on this list? What's least important on this list? And we're going to have some other questions for you to tell us in your own words what's important about aspects of the criteria and what's important about the jail. And then we also are going to give you the opportunity just for any comment you have on this process. We will read every comment. We will weigh in what you've said, and we will publish the results of the ranking exercise. So as you conclude listening to this video, you will see below this presentation, and this is on the Public Works website, you will see a link that takes you to the survey. What we want you to do now, or as soon as you can while this is fresh in your mind, is go to the survey, fill out the questions, give us your input, give us your thoughts. If you have any questions about this or are not certain how it works, there's an email address that you'll see to my colleague at PMC. It's Steve Zanoni at aboutpmc.com. You'll also see it. If there's anything about this which is unclear to you, you can send a message to my colleague, Steve Zanoni, and he'll answer your questions. So with that in mind, Andy or Curtis, any closing comment from you?
I just think this is a great opportunity for community involvement in the process, and I'm sure the steering committee will be happy to take into consideration the results.
And yeah, I think again, this is a community facility, as Andy has said and Jeff has said, and this is your chance to provide input into our process. So we really welcome your input. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for listening, and please do go to the website and please give us your feedback. Thank you and have a good day.